This program tonight won't exactly make your hair stand on end or give you shivers up the spine. It has to do with reconstructing Herod's temple, which was the temple at Jerusalem during the life and times of Jesus and the apostles. You might ask the question, well, why reconstruct it? Well, because so much of the life and ministry of Jesus and the apostles and the New Testament record actually revolved around the temple. And I think it's good when you read those accounts to have some sort of a mental picture of the scene. There are almost 100 references in the New Testament to that temple. You know, this was the temple where Zacharias, the father of John the Baptist, was offering incense when Gabriel came to tell him that he was going to have a son. This is the temple where baby Jesus was taken by his mother Mary and Joseph, where Simeon spoke, where Anna the prophetess spoke. It's where Jesus was taken on Passover when he was 12 years old and ended up talking to the doctors of the law. It was the pinnacle of the temple where he was tempted to cast himself down. Many references to Jesus going to this temple to teach, to heal, even overturn tables. Remember on one occasion as he was leaving the temple, the apostles were impressed with the stones, the nature of the stones that were involved making up that temple. It was while Jesus died on the cross that the veil in that temple was split in half from top to bottom. Well, the Romans, as we know, destroyed that temple in AD 70, and only a skeleton remains, but sufficient for archaeologists to reconstruct it. And it's interesting. It's interesting to see how they did it. In an earlier program during the series on Solomon, I related to the temple built by Solomon on Mount Moriah at Jerusalem, where the Muslim mosques now sit. Tonight I want to relate to the temple built there by Herod on the same mount many centuries later. In this aerial picture of Jerusalem, we're looking down on Mount Moriah, known as the Temple Mount. The outline of the mount can be clearly seen by what is left of the ancient enclosure walls. As you can see, two Muslim mosques sit on the mount today. The one with the golden dome is the Mosque of Omar, sometimes referred to as the Dome of the Rock, built about 1300 years ago. The other one, that is the one with the silver dome, which you see here, that one is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israel's first temple was built by Solomon on this mount around about 950 BC. That is 1600 years before the Muslim mosques were put there. 1600 years before Muhammad was known of. Altogether, the Israelites have had three different temples here. Solomon's was the first, destroyed by the Babylonians around 587 BC. The Jews who returned from Babylon built the second one in 537 BC. Then in 19 BC, Herod pulled that one down and built a third one on a grander scale. He also enlarged the Temple Mount or platform. The enclosure walls that we have actually been looking at, which now enclose the mosques, represents the size to which Herod increased the mount. This picture is an artist's conception of Herod's temple complex based on archaeological excavation and research. Actually, it might have been the picture before it. As you can see, it's been superimposed upon the present Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It's being viewed from the east. And this is another artist's impression of Herod's complex taken from much the same angle from the east. The Kidron Valley runs alongside the eastern wall, of course. This artist's impression views the complex from the south. The temple proper, where the priests performed their rituals, is in the centre, and here of course. The enclosure walls, an elaborate complex of buildings, can be seen surrounding the temple on all four sides. The lower courses of Herod's masonry still exist today in the enclosure walls around the mosque. This lower course here, as it goes all the way around. Actually, over 10,000 of Herod's stones still sit in their original positions in that enclosure wall. Here's a plan of Herod's enclosure walls. As you can see, it's not rectangular, it's more wedge-shaped. The total distance around the enclosure is about 2,000 metres, that's just over 5,000 feet, and the total area compassed in it is 35 acres, about 14 hectares. In this plan of the Temple Mount, the three colours represent three different stages or developments that the mount has been through. The square yellow section represents the enclosure that was around Solomon's temple. According to Ezekiel 45 verse 2 and the Mishnah, it was 500 cubits square. And as was shown in an earlier program, the archaeologists have traced the outline of it and found it to be exactly that. The blue section represents an extension of the platform, 40 metres, about 132 feet to the south, by the Jews during the 2nd century BC, the Maccabean era. The grey section represents Herod's extensions to the north, south and west to its present size. He didn't extend to the east due to the land dropping off steeply into the Kidron Valley. Herod, of course, had to extend the Temple Mount to accommodate his longer enclosure walls, and that required a lot of excavation, a lot of shoring up, that is land filling and reinforcing of the land platform, because the land slopes very steeply to the south, and there was a valley on the west, the Tiopian Valley. This drawing here depicts a corner extension on the south side where the land slopes down. This picture of the southeast corner shows how much fill Herod's extension required by comparing the ground level inside the walls with the ground level outside the walls. You know, you look at that ground level and look at this out here. It gives you an idea of just how much fill must have been involved to create that platform. You can also see how the enclosure wall acts as a retaining wall for all the fill put inside to make the temple platform level. It was the largest man-made platform in the ancient world, an enormous project, that is for sure. The temple proper, which you see here, where the priests performed their rituals, was started in 19 BC, and it was built in 1.5 years. Josephus says the materials for this were prepared and brought together before the old one was pulled down, due to Jewish fear that Herod might not have sufficient means to rebuild it. There was no lapse in the sacrificial system during construction, and for that reason, some don't regard it as a third temple, even though the second one was completely demolished. It was double the height of the second one and significantly wider. The cloisters, or the covered walkways, were finished in 8 years before the birth of Christ. But the work on the rest of the temple complex, especially the surrounding enclosure walls and elaborate hallways, porches, corridors, vaults and chambers, etc., took much longer. Over 1,000 oxen and wagons, 10,000 skilled workmen were involved in the building of this temple site. The whole complex was not completed till 62-64 AD, which means work was still taking place on the complex during New Testament times. And this is confirmed in John 2 verse 20, where the Jews, talking to Jesus about Herod's temple, said, 46 years have gone by and it's still not finished. The enclosure walls around the Temple Mount today are a patchwork or jigsaw of stones, and to the untrained eye all look much the same. Closer inspection, however, reveals differences. Different builders over the centuries have used different sizes and different shapes. As pottery and motor cars change shape and design and can be dated accordingly, so also can building blocks. They are, in fact, among the archaeologists' best dating tools. The differences do not merely relate to the size of the blocks, but also their bosses and margins. The following diagram explains. Here we have 4 rectangular blocks known as ashlars with bosses and margins. The margin is a narrow area that runs around the outside edge, such as, around there. The boss is the main area surrounded by the margin, which protrudes from the stone, seen in both head-on and side views in the diagram. That's the boss there that sticks out there in the middle here, of course. Due to the differences in sizes and shapes of the margins and bosses, the archaeologists are able to date the sections of the walls accordingly and ascertain who built them. Herod's masonry is quite distinctive, having a narrow margin of about 8 centimetres and a flat central boss that barely protrudes half a centimetre. The stones are very large, and so tight and exact was their fit that no adhesive was used between them. One of the most popular and well-known sections of the Temple Mount is an exposed part of Herod's western wall, the position of which can be seen in the aerial photo here, this section along here. We'll start our survey of Herod's temple on this side. Here's a closer view of it here down here. It's sometimes referred to as the Wailing Wall because for centuries Jews came here and still do to the mount and lament the destruction of their temple, and they pray for restoration. But if you visit Jerusalem, don't ask the taxi driver to take you to the Wailing Wall because he'll probably drop you off at the Inland Revenue Department. The popularity of the area is indicated by the crowd seen there in this picture. Certain holy days and religious festivals attract bigger numbers, of course. Only 7 courses of Herod's masonry are visible above ground level, and there are later courses above those. But there are 19 more courses beneath ground level of Herod's masonry, making bedrock 21 metres, about 68 feet below. Archaeologists have done deep excavation at some points of the wall, revealing the depth of it, and I'll show you pictures of that later in the program. This section of the Western Wall was the closest the Jews could get for a long time to the site of the Holy of Holies, where their temple used to be. The wall was almost regarded as a substitute for the temple, a gathering place, if you like, for worship and for prayer. At one stage of history, the Jews were forbidden to come to the wall to weep over the destruction of the temple, so they made Mount Moriah their place of pilgrimage. When the Mosque of Omar was built there, they returned to the wall for their ritual lamentation. 2,000 years of the ravages of nature has worn some of the stones away, testifying to their great age. but they are counted as precious to the Jews, especially the religious Orthodox Jews who would like to see a Jewish temple restored on the Mount. Prayers and supplications are continually being offered at the wall for the temple, the restoration of the temple, and other things, and prayer notes are often pushed into the cracks and the crevices of the stones, as you see in these pictures. Notice the pieces of paper there between the joins. Originally, of course, these stones had a fine, flush finish. I understand that prayers can even be faxed to the wall from around the world. When the Jews returned to their land after the Second World War, the Arabs, of course, were in control of the old city of Jerusalem, including its Temple Mount, and the Jews were not allowed access to the wall. But Bible prophecy affirmed that in the end time the Jews would not only return to their land, but also repossess Jerusalem, their ancient capital city, with its Temple Mount. As a result of the June 1967 war, Israel took control of the city, and pictures like this of Israeli soldiers gathered at the wall were published all around the world in the newspapers and magazines. Jews streamed in, gathered around the wall. It was really a great scene of mixed emotions. Some were laughing, others were crying, but they were all happy. Many danced, as is seen in this picture on the screen. After 2,000 years dispersion, they were finally back in their holy city. For 2,000 years, at their annual Passover, Jews around the world expressed their hope by saying, "Next year in Jerusalem." And finally, in June 1967, their hope was realised and fulfilled. The return of the Jews to their land and repossession of Jerusalem paved the way for the fulfilment of other end-time prophecies. Prophecies which must take place as a prelude to the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. One of those events will be the building of a Jewish temple on the Mosque Mount, that is on Mount Moriah, and a number of prophecies do actually predict this. It's among the signs of the second coming, and the Jewish occupation of Jerusalem was a necessary step in that direction, really a very important sign of greater things to come. As you can see, the Western Wall witnesses the gathering of huge crowds at times. Coming back to the aerial view again, the exposed section of the Western Wall where the Jews gather is only a 56 metre, about 185 foot section of the wall. Looking down, there it is down there again. The entire length of the Western Wall is 485 metres. That's 1,590 feet, over a quarter of a mile. But most of it, as you can see in this picture, has been built on and around by Arab dwellings. Look at all these Arab dwellings all down here. And this is the Western Wall. There it is going up there. But in more recent times, the Jews have dug a tunnel under those houses to form a walkway up the full length of the wall to the north corner right up there. That's the whole wall there. Access to the tunnel is through an arch at the northern end of the Wailing Wall. That's the entrance down there. This is the Wailing Wall here, of course. Here we are, back on the ground again, looking towards the archway and the wall, and of course the golden dome of the mosque looming large in the background. In New Testament times, the Jewish temple would have occupied that space and would have been seen reaching up into the sky. Notice that the plaza in front of the wall is divided by a screen. The section on the left is for men, and the section on the right is for women. In Herod's day, the arch supported a bridge which spanned a valley. Today, it forms part of a ceiling in a large Jewish prayer hall. Originally, the arch was higher, but got filled in over the centuries. It was first cleared of rubble and explored by Charles Wilson over 100 years ago, and for this reason, it's called Wilson's Arch. The arch we're talking about, of course, is here. And here we are, closer to it, closer again, and here we are inside the entrance of it. This is Charles Wilson here. He was a British engineer, excavator, who did a topographic survey of Jerusalem in 1844-46 and laid the foundations for the recovery of its material history. He later became known as Sir Charles. It was his excavation that found the remains of the arch. Another name that should also be mentioned among the pioneers of excavation at Jerusalem is Charles Warren, who you see here. He also was a British engineer. He came to the Holy Land in 1867, hoping to find the remains of Solomon's temple. He did a lot of excavating around the Temple Mount, examining and discovering, digging shafts and tunnels. The one on the screen was named after him. It goes down to the Gihon Spring, and he and Wilson were associates. You remember in a previous program we looked in more detail at this shaft and the spring. This is an 1870 illustration of Wilson's Arch, so to speak. A magnificent stone arch built in Herod's day 2,000 years ago. Wilson cleared the large hall under the arch of all of its rubble, and a shaft sunk by Warren can be seen on the left against the western wall. Talking about this down here. The shaft was actually found intact during the clearing of the large hall in 1968. Warren originally dug the shaft down to bedrock and discovered there were 14 courses of the western wall, all below ground level. Since 1968, a series of projects involving clearing, uncovering, cleaning and engineering have been undertaken by the Israeli Ministry of Religious Affairs. The cavernous hall of the arch has undergone further clearing out operation and has been provided with additional light. Originally, the arch rose some 22.5 metres, about 74 feet above the bedrock of the Tyropoeon Valley, but partial filling of the valley has reduced the height of the arch to about 7.5 metres, about 25 feet above the present pavement. Men study and pray at tables covered with velvet cloths in the hall of the arch along this section of the western wall, just as they do along the exposed wall outside, that is, along the Wailing Wall. Scrolls are stored in here and are often carried outdoors to be read in the plaza in front of the wall. Incidentally, the span of the arch is about 14 metres, about 45 feet. Small adjoining rooms south of the hall were also cleaned out by the Israeli ministry, and are now in use as Jewish prayer areas, storage of scrolls and religious books. They're often they're open to, of course, and used by the public. This cutaway drawing reveals that the area of Wilson's Arch is quite a complex of arches involving layers of structures. The top level on the right is the present ground level facing north. I'm talking about this area here. That represents the present ground level. At the far right, of course, here is the western wall, part of the Wailing Wall, with Wilson's Arch straight ahead through there, of course. A figure on the right of the top level leaning over one of Warren's shafts, which, though not shown in the drawing, extends down to bedrock. That's the individual there leaning over. Also on the right, under the top level, we see the original Herodian street running alongside the western wall, this street along here. I'll show you pictures of the paving slab shortly. Going back to the present ground level at the top of the diagram, running parallel with the western wall is, of course, the passageway. Here it is here. During medieval times, it was believed that this was originally a secret passageway which provided King David with hidden access to the Holy Mount from his palace. But their understanding of the location of David's palace in those days was wrong. The vaults on the north side of this passageway were built to support an aqueduct over 8 centuries after David's time. This cutaway diagram shows the passageway, of course, passageway running all the way along here. Here's another diagram which helps to get a better mental picture of the passageway in relation to the western wall and Wilson's Arch. Here we have the mosque, of course, and here's the western wall here, and the tunnel, of course, is right under all the Arab houses along there. This picture was taken during the excavation of the tunnel up the western wall. An Iranian immigrant is seen coming from the excavation with a wheelbarrow of debris, and in the bottom right corner is a tiny part of a grate in the floor here, which covers one of Warren's shafts. A light in it shows the 14 courses of the wall right down to bedrock. Coins get thrown in there evidently by tourists and reflected by the light from the bottom. We're looking up the western wall tunnel here. It's 275 metres, about 900 feet long and about 2.5 metres wide. And it's 1.8 metres, that's about 6 feet wide enough for people to pass one another. Heavy galvanised steel beams go up each side of the tunnel and across the top. The thick beams, of course, are sunk in concrete, while at the top they support the 10 centimetres, about 4 inches thick, reinforced, pre-stressed, precast concrete ceiling. The purpose of all this reinforcing, of course, is to prevent damage to the foundations. That is, the foundations of the Arab buildings above, under which the tunnel has been dug. It would be rather embarrassing to the Jews if they undermined the Arab buildings, causing them all to collapse. It's known as the rabbinical tunnel. The Jewish rabbis no doubt had a lot to do with getting this tunnel dug in order that they could walk up the full length of the western wall parallel to the Holy Temple Mount and be close to where the Holy of Holies used to be on the other side of the wall. There's a bit of a recess in there with some people standing in it. As you can imagine, thousands of cubic metres of fill were excavated in this tunnel project. During the process, this cord-shaped stone was found, 180 metres, about 600 feet up the tunnel. It measured 5 metres, about 16 feet long, 90 centimetres, or about 3 feet high, and these men were photographed as they were removing it. The most striking portion of the wall is here, about 18 metres, that's 60 feet north of Wilson's Arch, and 9 courses above bedrock. It has been called the Master Course because it consists of 4 blocks over 3 metres, that's 10 feet high, the largest so far discovered in the Temple Mount enclosure wall. The largest one is 13.7 metres, that's about 45 feet long, and 3.65 metres, about 12 feet high and deep. One solid piece of limestone weighing an estimated 570 tonnes. But all superlatives aside, even an average ashlar weighed between 2.5 to 5 tonnes. No wonder, as Jesus was leaving the temple on one occasion, a disciple said to him, "Look, Master, what huge stones are here." These massive ashlars were not carved from the bedrock at the temple site. They're different limestone from what is in that area. They came from a quarry about 1,500 metres to the north of the temple, and they had to be transported to the site. Thousands and thousands of large blocks of stone were cut by hand by hundreds of stonemasons in the quarries, not to mention round pillars. The place would have been a hive of activity with the constant sound of sawing and chipping. The quarry was 38 metres, about 125 feet higher than the Temple Mount, so the journey to the temple site was all downhill, making transportation a lot easier. As these drawings indicate, the large ones were pulled by teams of oxen on rollers, by ropes attached to pegs, inserted into holes in the ashlars. The smaller ones were able to go on wagons. Sophisticated Roman equipment like this was available for lifting the stones, and the men worked from inside the walls. After the laying of each course of stones, a layer of fill would then be put in up to the level of the new course. From this newly created work level, the next course could be laid, and so on. As far as the higher courses of stone were concerned, which extended above the height of the inside platform, either these kind of cranes, as you see here, were used, or ramps might have been built up which oxen pulled the ashlar. A similar system could very well have been used centuries before to build the pyramids. Coming back to the tunnel, the mammoth stones found there are considerably longer and heavier than the monoliths found in the pyramids, not to mention Stonehenge and Easter Island. Though the area on the other side of these stones cannot be explored, that is, inside and under the Temple Mount itself, where the mosque is, radar soundings have revealed a huge vaulted area there. The massive stones may serve as a support and counterforce to that area. Next to the massive stones on the northern end, the excavators of the tunnel came across this ancient gateway, which had been blocked since medieval times before the Arabs built their houses against it. Charles Warren discovered it over a century ago during his probes inside the Temple Mount, but its exact location got lost or concealed. But his colleague, Charles Wilson, rediscovered it and named it after Warren. Today it is still called Warren's Gate. The position of the gate is shown on this drawing of Herod's temple. There it is there, number 23. Number 24 is where those huge, the biggest ashlars are located. This gate led directly into the Temple Mount and was the most important of all because it was the nearest to the Holy of Holies. Holy of Holies, here's the temple proper, and the Holy of Holies was in there. So you can see how directly related that gate is to the temple. Seeing that the Holy of Holies housed the Ark of the Covenant, this gate and the passageway that runs from it into the Temple Mount is really one of the most significant historical remnants of temple times known today. According to a book I read, when the excavators of the tunnel first came across the gate, the rabbis broke through it and they explored the passageway. The book claims that deep within the passageway, close to where the Holy of Holies was located, digging discovered a secret chamber in which they believe are hidden the treasures of the temple, including the Ark of the Covenant. But only time will tell the truth of that. Coming back to Wilson's arch that we're looking at down here, this picture shows the stone structure above and around it today, in which, as pointed out before, there are other arch chambers and passageways. An interesting comparison can be made between this one and the next one. In this drawing of the original temple complex, the arch can be seen here. There it is. It supported a bridge, an aqueduct that spanned the Tyropoeon Valley to connect the Temple Mount with the upper city on the west. Some believed it carried water into the Temple Mount from the pools near Bethlehem. In this drawing of Herod's temple, we are viewing it from the west. The bridge or the viaduct is quite distinct, coming over here. As I said before, Wilson's arch originally rose some 22.5 metres, about 74 feet above the valley, but the valley had been filled up with debris and earth, burying the arches, vaulted chambers and storerooms, along with many of the lower courses of the western wall and the paved street that ran along the valley. There's another artist's impression is where Wilson's arch is and linking with the western side of the city. What you're looking at here is part of Herod's original paving in the street that ran up the western wall, but is now under the present ground level of Wilson's arch. Judging from the height of Herod's street, he obviously filled in a lot of the valley as backing to the western retaining wall when he enlarged the temple platform, and the course of history has added to it, bringing it up to its present level. Talking about paving slabs, recent excavations further south along the western wall and 7.5 metres below present ground level uncovered an ancient Herodian street, seen here, with large, well-dressed paving slabs running parallel to the wall. I pointed them out on the cutaway plan earlier. Since its destruction in AD 70, much of Herod's construction has been underground, but archaeological excavation has been uncovering it. Among the rubble, they find broken ashlars, wall fragments, pillar fragments, etc., etc. All of these, along with existing sections of the temple enclosure wall, not to mention descriptions by Josephus, enable the archaeologists to work out the design of the upper section of the enclosure wall. Also of help in ascertaining the architectural features of the wall was this limestone column. was found lying in the quarry where it was made. It was rejected by Herod's masons because it cracked midway along its length as it was being quarried out of the rock, and has remained where it was abandoned. It was probably destined for one of the Temple Mount's porticos. Other structures built by Herod, still existing today in the Holy Land, also helped the archaeologists to ascertain the design features of the temple's enclosure wall. This structure you're looking at on the screen is one of them. It's the enclosure wall of the tomb of the patriarchs at Hebron, which it is believed was of similar design to the temple enclosure wall at Jerusalem. This is one of a number of artists' impressions of the temple based on knowledge gained since the advent of modern archaeology. You'll notice that the upper section of the enclosure wall is very similar in design to that building at Hebron. Okay, so far on this western side, we have looked at Warren's Gate here. We've seen the largest stones in this area and there. We've looked at Wilson's Arch, the original arch seen there, and the Wailing Wall, which is along here. Let us now go to what is known as Barclay's Gate, this gate here, named after the man who discovered it. Barclay's Gate, in this artist's impression, they're up here, it's the artist's impression of the whole western wall actually gives an idea of what originally looked like. You can see how similar in design it is to Warren's Gate here. As you can see in this drawing, inside the gate is an internal stairway that led up to the outer courts of the Temple Mount, where the mosque is today. See, you can see how the steps come up and around, up onto the mount level. And as you can see from this picture, the gate was at the southern end of the west, what is now known as the Western or the Wailing Wall. Barclay's Gate was named after a 19th century British architect. Although most of the gate survives, little of it can actually be seen today because it has disappeared behind later Muslim construction and beneath the raised street level. Half of the massive 50-ton lintel is visible and has been outlined in black. As you see, that's only just a part of it there. The smaller stones below it, or down around here, now block the upper part of the gate's doorway. The rest of the doorway is obscured by this protruding building here, built ages ago by the Muslims. Here's a close-up of that section of the 50-ton lintel and the smaller stones which are blocking the entrance. Here it is again from a slightly different view. And in this picture, the lintel has been superimposed. This sketch alongside the gate indicates its original shape and position. The half section of the lintel outlined in black is the coloured section in the diagram there. The rest of the gate is indicated by the black dashes. Most of it's under today's ground level and behind the wall. Here's a closer picture of what I mean. There's part of the lintel, the rest of it goes through there, and here's the rest of the original gate down there, which you can't see today either. Here's a reconstruction of what the gate originally looked like. This is actually part of a model of Herod's temple, which I'll show you in a moment. A staircase led up to a narrow street which ran along the western wall, beneath which on each side were shops, two of which are seen here. Inside the gate, an internal stairway led up to the outer courts of the Temple Mount, which I drew attention to earlier. Here's the model here, the largest, most detailed and most accurate model of Herod's temple that has ever been built. The model measures about 6 metres by 3.6, that's 20 feet by 12 feet, and it's built to a scale of 1 to 100. The model is the work of Alec Garrard, seen here by the holiest area of the Temple Mount, that is the sanctuary itself. Garrard, a farmer, former house builder and lay preacher, has been a keen model maker from a young age, and he spent 3 years researching on the temple and took 4 years to build it. He keeps it in a barn adjoining his 16th century farmhouse in the British countryside of East Anglia. Coming back to Barclay's Gate, the internal stairway that led up to the courts of the Temple Mount were L-shaped, as you see in this cutaway diagram. It's the L shape coming up there. The same actually applied to Warren's Gate, the same L-shaped stairway coming up there. Excavation has revealed that Herod's main street was 4 metres, about 13 feet below the threshold of the gate. So a stairway obviously led up to it as depicted in the model and in the drawings. Notice that Barclay's L-shaped stairway comes up alongside the early extension wall built by the Hasmoneans or the Maccabees. That's represented their extension there, and of course this wall came up close to that. And the L-shaped stairway at Warren's Gate comes up alongside Solomon's enclosure wall. This yellow section, of course, is Solomon's, and that gate there comes up against that wall there. You know, all sorts of tunnels and chambers and corridors and cisterns have been built in the spaces between the walls. In this picture, we're looking over the top of the wall or walkway, which projects from the western wall, which has more recently been built over part of Barclay's Gate. I'm referring to this area here. As you can see, the projecting wall acts as a walkway up into the Temple Mount and has been covered in. The walkway is the main access to the Mount, especially for tourists, and is a good vantage point, providing a good view over the forecourt of the western wall. And also, of course, provides a good view of Wilson's Arch, which is in the shade over there. Let's now move further south along the western wall, down to the southwest corner, to what is now named Robinson's Arch. On this drawing, it's number 7, around here. It's labelled G in this particular drawing. Here it is, and here. The next picture that you're going to see was taken of this corner area in more recent times. Here we are, here. The southwest corner, and you can see there the remains of the arch sticking out of the wall there. Here we are a little closer, and in the next picture we'll move in closer again. The large distinctive ashlars of Herod's masonry can be seen going up to where the arch was, and the way in which the springers and what is left of the arch fit cleanly into Herod's masonry indicate the arch was built at the same time. Excavation around the base of the wall was undertaken by Benjamin Mazar in the late 1960s and in the early 70s. And many of the stones from the original top courses of the wall, toppled by the Romans in AD 70, were uncovered. In this picture, the courses of smaller stones above Herod's were put there by later conquerors after the Romans, such as you see up above there. Incidentally, this here is Edward Robinson, after whom the arch was named. He lived from 1794 to 1863, and he has been hailed as the father of biblical geography. He was the first to discover or take particular note of the arch in the early 19th century. These pictures were taken before excavation around the base of the wall took place. They give you an idea of how close the arch was to the ground. See, there it is there, and you look at the ground level in there. It also give you an idea of how much excavation has taken place in this area to have them in proper position up the wall. At first, Robinson thought the arch represented the first of several arches supporting a bridge over the Tyropoeon Valley, connecting the Temple Mount to the upper western part of the city. Here's another picture showing the excavation that's taken place around the base of the southwest corner of the wall, uncovering the full extent of the arch's spring, now seen halfway up the wall as a result of the excavation. Aerial pictures such as this give you a better idea of the amount of excavation that took place along the area by Robinson's arch. I mean, there it is there, and you get an idea of the excavation that's taken place around there. And also in here, here's the Wailing Wall, and here's the present ground level here, and look at the excavation that's been taking place there, and Robinson's arch now is up there. This picture also shows you the same thing, the ground level and the excavation level. The big drop from the road level runs down the western wall to Robinson's arch, and again, you look from this aerial view, almost looking down vertically on it. You can see that. Got a blue tent up there. I'm not sure what that is, but look at the drop now. Originally, that level like there just came right across from there. Prior to excavation, the road level went across to the wall, so you can see how much rubble has been removed. Now, believing that the arch was the first of several supporting a bridge over the valley, shafts were sunk opposite the arch where the valley used to be in search for remains of the viaduct. They failed to find the piers that would have supported such a viaduct, but they did find piers which supported a monumental stairway such as is depicted here in this drawing. Here it is on the model. About 13 metres, about 42 feet out from the wall, the excavators found the pier of an arch at the exact spot indicated by the span of the destroyed arch. But they failed to find any more piers of arches running out from the wall to the west, where the valley used to be. Instead, the archaeologists found a series of piers of graduated height running south, parallel with the wall. These piers resulted in the discovery that Robinson's Arch was not the remains of a bridge or a viaduct, but a stairway. The stairway led up from the main street and then turned right towards the western wall. Robinson's Arch supported the upper portion of the stairway attached to the wall. Josephus confirms this. In his record, he refers to the many steps involved in the stairway which went down into the valley, not across the valley. This entrance to the Temple Mount over the monumental stairway makes a total of 4 entrances on the western side. Josephus records this fact, and years of archaeological excavations have finally verified it. The 4 entrances are known today and are labelled here as Warren's Gate, Wilson's Arch, Barclay's Gate and Robinson's Arch. The western wall has become a veritable honour roll of some of Jerusalem's past Gentile explorers. Other artists have given their impressions of Robinson's Arch, which I will quickly show you out of interest. The monumental stairway did not give direct access to the temple courts. Instead, it led into the royal stoa or basilica, which, as you see here, ran the entire length of the southern wall. The wall measured 278 metres, about 912 feet. This is what we're talking about here. There, of course, is Robinson's Arch. In the next pictures, the stoa is seen from the east and the west. This picture gives an interior view of the royal stoa or portico in the model. 162 monolithic pillars in 4 rows divided it into a central nave and 2 aisles. Each of those columns was 15 metres, about 50 feet high, and their circumference was such that it took 3 men with arms outstretched and touching to encircle them. It was known as the Hall of Columns, and it opened on the northern side of the temple court. And this is believed to be the area where the money changers were. This is the eastern end of the Hall of Columns in the model, where an apse built adjacent to the eastern wall is the setting for a meeting of the Jewish High Court, that is the Sanhedrin, where Jesus would have been taken to be interrogated. 2 rows of semicircular benches accommodated the 71 elders that sat in judgment in an area of the hall. Some members of the public were also in attendance. A partition probably divided the apse from the main hall of columns. Here we see the eastern end of the Hall of Columns from inside the temple court. Like other stoas, it was built in 2 stories with a clerestory or raised roof with windows on top. Josephus describes the architectural style used to decorate the hall. For example, he says that the capitals of the columns were ornamented in the Corinthian style. During excavations, many fragments of Corinthian-style capitals were in fact found. The gateway at Robinson's Arch is, as you'll have noticed, part of a large tower out at the southwest corner. Talking about this area up here. During excavation around the corner, this large stone bearing an inscription was found, which had fallen from a pinnacle or parapet above when the Romans knocked the top off in AD 70. You can see the inscription along here. It's 2.4 metres, 8 feet long, and it bears an incomplete Hebrew inscription which says, "To the place of trumpeting." Although the excavators who found the stone in 1969 made an earnest search for the missing fragment, it was never found. Whatever was at the end of the inscription, no one knows, but the stone indicates that atop the Temple Mount walls, above Robinson's Arch on the southwest corner, there was a special designated place for a priest to stand to blow the trumpet, as this reconstruction here indicates. The reconstruction of the balustrade in the previous drawing was based on this segment from which the inscription came. The segment still lies at the base of the Temple Mount wall, but the inscription has been removed to a museum. As we saw before, tumbled building blocks lay in a heap at the base of the southwestern corner, all toppled, of course, by the Romans in AD 70. Archaeologists have uncovered the paved Herodian street along the western side of the Temple Mount. Coming back to the trumpeter, the trumpet would have been used to announce the beginning or end of the Sabbath, as well as other Jewish holy days and festivals. Josephus, the first century historian, describes this very spot as, quote, above the roof of the priest's chambers. And this drawing here depicts a priest up the top of that southwest corner. See him up the top there. One of the few surviving artefacts from King Herod's temple is this limestone sundial, found during the late Benjamin Mazar's excavations in a pile of debris from the 70 AD Roman destruction of the temple. Archaeologists have discovered similar sundials throughout the Mediterranean, like this red sandstone one. The Aramean inscription on it indicates its origin. As you can see, it's marked with 11 hour lines, and the gnomon or rod, which shows the time by its shadow on the sundial, is placed top centre. The Jewish sundial, found among the debris of Herod's temple, has this 7-branch menorah carved on its back, a symbol reserved for the Jewish priests. The sundial was so small, a mere 5 centimetres, about 2 inches high and wide, that the excavators used a matchstick as its gnomon. Well, that brings me to the end of this program. This is part 1. There's 2 parts involved. Next time, I'll take you around the southern part of the wall, looking into the ruins there and working out what it originally used to look like. And then we'll go around into the eastern wall as well and have a look at a few things up in the northern wall, so that we can complete the whole circle of the temple, giving you a fairly good idea of what it looked like in the times of our Lord Jesus Christ.